Welcome to Pay It Forward. I have the sweetest new little project for you all today. It is a little bag charm. You can see they're made up in felts and fabric. It's got a teeny weeny little bear on there. You could use it for any bag, but I'm thinking probably a baby bag or a diaper bag. If you would like to make it along with me, simply click on the link in the description below. You can download your free pattern templates and then I'll show you how it's done. So here are the things you're going to need to make up your little bag charm today. Now there's a few different ways that we can do it and I'll show you that as we go along. So first of all, you'll have your pattern templates and you'll see that you need to cut out a front and a back. I cut those out in felt and I have heat and bond fusible webbing on the back, and I leave those papers on for the moment. And you'll also need a front fabric panel which sits on the front there, so something that's really colourful. A very busy print is really good, or something that's got a a very clear feature there. I've picked out this little one that's got a little bear, and he becomes a bit of the hero of the whole thing. You'll need the same pattern piece cut out in a single piece of felt, or if you can, I've got stiffened felt here. It's just a little bit firmer. Maybe you'll have just a little bit of fine wadding. That will do as well. It's just something to give a little bit of fill and stability inside that little charm. You'll also need your two little cutouts with your fusible webbing heat and bond on the back for the little flower, and you will need your tiny little bear. Now he has fusible webbing on the back as well. You'll notice that all of my pieces I still have the paper on. There's a reason for that. And the reason why I'm using heat and bond throughout this little project is not always to use it for adhesion. In some cases I'm using it just for stabilizing the felt, so that we can sew the felt and know that those little edges will hold together well. So sometimes I use things for reasons that they're not really made for, but if it works, it works. So we also need the little tiny muzzle piece for our little bear, and that also has fusible webbing on the back. We need an assortment of buttons that will match your colours. Now we need a little centering button for the flower, and we will need a button which actually folds down and is our securing button for our tab. And also I add a few little buttons in decoration. Now how you decorate the front of your little charm is entirely up to you. I've got a couple of examples here. I'm going to be using a couple of little printed out words on fabric that I have. There's heat and bond behind those, and they're just a little couple of words printed on my printer on some fabric, and I'll be sewing those on. But you really can use anything. For example, this one's very simple. You can see that with this one I've just let the print tell the story. So if you have some really vibrant prints that have some characters and so on, they work really well, especially if you're making it for a baby. You see I've only used a couple of words there and just a little button. On this one again, really made use of the little print there in the fabric, couple of words and a couple of coordinating buttons. This one a little bit different, still using the little words, still got our little flower there, but I've put a little strip of fabric and a little strip of ric-rac there too. So you can imagine all of the things. You may have little embellishments and things that you can press on, that you can stitch on, and anything will work with your colours. We also need a little ring. Now there's many ways you can attach this. I'm going to be using just a normal little ring that will go around a bag handle. That's a little split ring. You can use the little clippy one like I have here with the little D-ring connection there. Anything will work. This one has a little chain, little key chain that will slip through. So to start with, what we're going to do, our first step is to remove our backing paper from this one, and we're going to press into place on one of these pieces, situating it right down. Remember that we're going to be sewing around the entire outside of our little charm, and we're going to press that one on. Now anything else that you have that will be pressed on and stitched around, like my little words here, they need to be pressed on now. And while you're pressing those on, remember to leave the backing paper on your big heart shape so that it's not going to end up stuck to your ironing board. And trust me, I've done that before. So leave the paper on this one and obviously take the papers off of these ones and press them on. Then we'll be able to come back and do some stitching around them. So there I have pressed on my little heart shape and my little words, and then I've taken that one to the machine. You can see I've just stitched around the very outside edges of those little pieces. Using contrasting coloured threads can make all the difference in these little projects because you really do see those little pops of colour. I've just pulled green from my print, and that's just helped tie it all in together. So next step is to add any of your other embellishments. At this stage, our little flower is added after we have joined the back to the front. So I'm just going to position that one in, and I can see where I would like to add my little buttons, and I'm just going to sew them into place there, because that way all of the little sewing and stitching behind will be hidden between the layers. So we do as much as we can now so that we don't have too much work showing behind our little charms. So I'm going to sew those little buttons on. With our buttons in place now, our next step is to join the back to the front. So I have removed my paper from my back, and I have my little filler piece, and I'm just going to add a little bit of, I'm using just a clear craft glue. It's fairly quick drying and it stays quite flexible once it is dry. So we're just going to first glue whatever it is that you're using for your filler. Just going to glue that one in place, and we just want it to sit right in the middle there with enough space around the entire outside so that we'll be able to do our stitching. And just press that one down, and then we're going to do the same thing. We're going to glue right around the edge, and we will be sewing this, so the glue is really just to hold it in place while we sew, but it is useful if we can get all of those edges just nicely joined together. A bit more on the back. Just a matter of placing our top piece, lining it up. I usually line it up with the tab first so that I've got that nice and straight. Just a matter of pressing all those edges together, and you can use your little clips if you like to clip around the edge while that's drying, just to keep it all together. And we're actually going to let that one dry. We're going to let that sit there for a while and dry, because you don't want to take that one to the machine and have anything shifting. Now there's a few ways that we can treat this edge once it's dry. For today, for the sake of time, I'm going to be showing you that I just take it to the machine and I sew around the entire edge on the machine as I have on this one. But there's a few different things that you can do. You can see on this one that I've sewn a lovely blanket stitch with a pearl thread or embroidery thread right around the outside, including that top section. I've done that one with this one too. You can see that the contrast of that looks really lovely. I do have a video that shows you exactly how to do that blanket stitch. You can look that up and give that one a try. Alternatively, if you want to really invest a little bit more time, I also have a video that shows you how to do that beaded blanket stitch, which just incorporates a little tiny bead with every stitch, and it really gives it a lovely finish. So if you've got a bit more time, that one's definitely worth doing. But today we're going to be sewing just on the machine around that whole outer edge. But for now, we're going to let that one dry, because it really does need to dry before I pop it under the sewing machine. So we're going to go ahead, move ahead with our little bear. So the first step with our little bear is that we're going to remove, I've got just one of the pieces, I'm going to remove the backing paper there. Now you might think, why didn't we just interface these little pieces? Interfacing would make it such a little tiny bear. If we're not going to be turning him through, we're going to have raw edges. Interfacing would have showed on that outside edge. So just by using a little bit of heat and bond like that, our edges are bonded and there's no change in colour on the edge there. So we're now going to take, you need a little loop. I'm using pearl thread here, as I have with this one, that will be extending out the top of his little head. And I'm just going to glue that one in place, just about here, just with enough extending to create my little hook. So I'm just going to use my craft glue and glue that little one in place. My little string there, glued into place. We're just going to let that one dry, and now we're going to take the front of our little bear. Now you can see there, I've left the paper on. This is the little front of our bear. I've left the paper on and I've taken that one to my ironing board and I've ironed on the little muzzle piece that had the little fusible webbing behind it. So I've ironed that on in place. You can see exactly where I've done that there. And then I can take off my paper, because now is when we want to do our sewing. Peel that one away. By keeping the paper on, we've preserved all of those edges. So you can see there that I've just made a tiny little mark across his nose there, and I'm going to be sewing just a tiny little couple of stitches across to create a little nose, and then a couple of little stitches to create a little crooked mouth there. I'm using Gutermann extra strong thread, my top stitching thread, my favourite thread that I talk about all the time. It's a great thread because it's got some gloss and sheen to it, so you can often use it in place of an embroidery thread. So I'm just going to come in from behind and I'm just going to make a couple of little stitches to create a little nose. So it's just 3 little stitches there I've made. Now I'm just going to make a little mouth, and rather than trying to make it even, which is actually quite tricky on tiny little things like this, I actually purposefully make a little crooked smile. So just 1 stitch across. Whoop. And that's really all we need. It's just such a tiny little bear. And I am using black. You could use something a little bit softer than that, but I think that the black really stands out. So you can see he's just got his little nose and his little crooked smile there. And we'll just carefully secure that behind. And his little eyes we stitch in after he is stuffed and all joined together, just so that we can sink them a little. Snip that one off. And now our next step is to join our little bear together. So you can see that those little pieces match up together beautifully. Now, because we're not turning our little bear through, we're not putting right sides together, we're putting wrong sides together. And we're just going to stitch around in a very neat little stitch. So you can see there it's quite tiny, and it will hold him together beautifully to handle just a little bit of stuffing. And I'm going to start my stitching just a little way down his leg. So here is the opening we're going to leave. Just under his arm, we're going to leave this section open, and we're going to stitch him up all the way around. So what I'm going to do is, again, I have my needle threaded up with a Gutermann top stitching thread. I find that these little bears look better if there's a slightly contrasting colour on the outside of them. It just seems to finish them off well. So I'm coming in between put my needle in between those two layers, and I'm just going to take some, come out between on one of the sides, just taking, you see there, taking a little bit of that felt, but coming out through the felt there. Just so that my little knot will stay inside that little leg there and not pull all the way through. Now you find it's quite easy to hold him together as you go. Now we're going to work what is essentially a tiny little blanket stitch. I guess you would call it, when it's this size, you would call it a buttonhole stitch. And so again, I do have a video that shows you how to do this stitch. This is a very tiny version. So we're just coming down, our stitches are quite tiny, only about 1 millimeter. I'm coming through, went through both layers, and my thread is coming out through the loop there. And our stitches are only about 1 millimeter apart because we don't want any stuffing to escape. So you can see I've gone through both layers and my thread is coming out through my loop, which is going to make a lovely secure little binding all the way around this little bear and close that seam nicely. So tiny, keep them all the same, and you can see we've got that lovely little binding coming up along there. That's going to keep that seam nicely closed. Now I'm going to work my way all the way around that entire little bear, right the way around, and I'm going to finish up just under his arm. You can see there that I have my little bear stitched up all of the way around, and that I've just finished here just underneath his little arm. So we have a little opening here. Now I'm going to leave my needle on and my thread still attached, and now we're going to put a little bit of polyester filling in him. It's only a tiny little bit. Now the best way to do that is, I actually have specialty forceps, so you've seen me use these before in some of my other videos. This is my tiniest pair, which is obviously very useful for a tiny little project like this. My suggestion for this little bear is ordinary household tweezers are the best for filling this little guy. Most people have some little tweezers lying around, so you really need tiny, tiny little pieces. And we're just going to get them right up. Now the areas that we're going to fill first are his little arms and legs, the parts that are a little bit tricky to get to, and particularly this little one here. And it might seem quite difficult. First of all, I might just add, because there's heat and bond between those two layers, it can be just a little bit sticky. So if you just pop your little tweezers in and just make sure that those are separated, and then we're going to jump in with our little bit of filling into that little side there. Best time to get into that little arm there is first. It can seem a little tricky, but the tweezers will help you get in there. We want to get it right down to that end of that arm. You find that that little stitch that you've done is quite strong, but certainly don't push your tweezer ends through that little end of that little hand there. So you can see it's just filled that one out just enough to plump him out just a little bit. I guess you could leave him flat. If you didn't want to be filling him, you could leave him flat. It would still look cute hanging there, but I think that little bit of stuffing in him makes him look like a real little teddy. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pop and move across and do this second arm here. And you can see you really don't need very much. But those little fine tips really get that one in there. Then I'm going to fill the little legs the same way. And then I'm going to fill his little head and then his little body section. So there we go, my little bear is all filled out, and I can go ahead now, because I've still left my thread attached, and I can just tuck that last little bit of filling in there, and I can go ahead and close my little opening, just continuing on with the same stitch that I have all the way around that little bear, and you'll find that he'll close up nice and tight with a lovely even finish. Just make sure you're getting both sides of that fabric in, pulling those nice and tight. There's our little bear all sewn up, and so now let's give him some eyes. So I've re-threaded my needle with my extra strong Gutermann thread in black, and we're going to, I've got a knot in the end, we're just going to come in at the back of the head there, and we're going to come out. You can see there that I've just made two little dots there where I want my eyes to be, and it's really just a matter of we're just going to do just a couple of the tiniest stitches. Come out on that spot. I've got my awl here ready because I want to be able to make that hole in the felt just a little bit bigger, just so that I can pull my knot through and have it disappear. As you can see, it has there. We can close those fibres up, and that's quite hidden there. So I'm just going to do a couple of tiny stitches. Now I'm going to come back out again at the back of the head because I want to pull those little stitches in quite firm there. You can see that that pulls that eye in and makes it just that little bit more realistic. I'm going to go back into the same hole that I just came out of, but I'm travelling a different route this time, and I'm just going to make another stitch, just like in a little crossover, like a little cross pattern. Out again the back of the head, and you can see I can really pull that little eye in there, and I'm just going to repeat with the other side. Now with both my little bear's eyes in place there, now I'm going to add just a little piece of pearl thread to go around his neck. You can just tie it around, but I find that if you stitch it on, it's a lot more permanent. So that's just my chosen colour there, and I'm just going to start just where I want that bow to start being tied up. So I'm just going to take one little stitch, leave my thread hanging there so I have something to tie up. I'm going to go around the back of the head, just take another little stitch, out again, around the other side like we did with the front, and I'm just going to match up. You can see there I'm just going to match up, just dive in here. Take my needle off, and I can tie up a little bow around his neck. There I have my little bear all finished, and he's got his little bow tied up there. So now I can move on. We're going to pop my little bear aside, and I can move on now. My little heart shape is all dry. Now I'm going to take that one to the machine, and I am going to sew all the way around, even that top edge, right the way around, very close to the edge, probably just about 2 millimeters in. I'm not going to use a contrasting thread because I really don't want it to be seen. I just want it to be basically a top stitch. Now here is where, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and do your blanket stitching instead, right round that edge, or as I showed you before, the little blanket stitch with the little bead, and look for those videos of mine because you'll find them really useful. Now that my little heart shape is top stitched all the way around, we're just going to add our final 2 embellishments. Now I've removed the paper from my little flower pieces there. Now you may want to just use a little bit of craft glue and just glue those 2 little pieces together, just so that they don't move when you're stitching that one on. And I'm just going to be placing that one there, making sure I'm not covering up any of my other my other little pieces, and I will be sewing straight through all those layers right there, and then I will be adding, so now is when you add your whatever your little attachment, hanging attachment will be. I'm just going to use a split ring for now, and I can pop that one in and add my little button and stitch through all of those layers. So there you can see I've sewn on my 2 final buttons. My little loop is joined, and I've just used a little jump ring to join my little teddy on there, and you can see that that's come together really beautifully. Such a lovely little project to make. Now remember to have a look at my other stitches, my other videos that show you all sorts of different stitches. I'm sure you're going to have a whole lot of fun making up so many different types from this little pattern, and I certainly hope you've enjoyed it. Well, thank you for joining me today making up this little project. It's always fun to make up something that's just sweet and pretty. If you have enjoyed this video, I would love a thumbs up. That would be absolutely beaut. In the meantime, remember to subscribe, because lots more of these types of little simple projects coming up, along with some new dolls. Remember always, everyone, to pay the good stuff forward. And until next time, it's Heru from me.